My name is Emily Carson. I'm 42 years old, divorced, and living alone on the outskirts of Portland in a quiet neighborhood where the silence is often louder than the occasional hum of distant traffic. For the past few years, life has followed a predictable rhythm, calm, steady, and if I'm honest, a little colorless. I work from home as a freelance editor, spending long hours hunched over my laptop, surrounded by manuscripts and half-empty coffee mugs. My only real company is my cat, Luna, who has become my sounding board for everything from plot holes to emotional breakdowns. She listens silently, blinking with slow serenity, as if she understands it all. 3 years ago, my husband Mark and I finalized our divorce. There were no scandalous betrayals, no vicious arguments, no final screaming match. Just a quiet unraveling. We drifted apart gradually, like two boats carried by different currents in the same ocean, close enough to see each other but too far to reach. Eventually we stopped trying. The love faded, and in its place settled a kind of indifferent peace. Our parting was civil, even kind in its own way. But the silence that followed, that was the part one wasn't ready for. Since then, my life had become stable, yes, but also painfully hollow. Had my routines, my work, my coffee, my cat. But I missed connection. I missed being seen. It was a Thursday evening in mid-October when everything began to shift. Outside, rain was falling in relentless sheets, drumming against the windows and soaking the world in gray. I hadn't eaten all day, too distracted by deadlines and edits. Hunger finally nudged me toward my phone, where I scrolled aimlessly through food delivery apps, craving something warm and comforting. I landed on Alfredo pasta from a local place called Marco's Kitchen. It wasn't fancy, but it always hit the spot. I placed the order and curled up on the couch, blanket over my legs, trying to shake the chill from the air and from my bones. About 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I saw a young man standing on my porch. He couldn't have been more than 18. Rain dripped from his red raincoat, his hair plastered to his forehead, yet he was smiling, polite, unbothered, almost cheerful despite being soaked through. "Delivery for Emily?" he asked, his voice light, brushing the wet strands from his eyes. "That's me," I said, taking the bag from his hand. I noticed how the rain clung to him. "Wow, you must be freezing." He laughed, shrugging. "It's part of the job. You get used to it." I reached for a cash tip, but he gently shook his head. "It's okay, ma'am. Stay dry and enjoy your dinner." Something about the way he said it stuck with me. It wasn't just polite. It was genuine, real, like he actually meant it. I watched him walk back into the rain, his figure blurring against the wet night as he climbed onto a bicycle and pedaled off. There was an odd warmth in my chest as I closed the door. I didn't know his name, but for the first time in a while I felt noticed. The following week, on another dreary evening, I found myself once again scrolling through delivery apps. Maybe it was the Alfredo I was craving, or maybe it was the simple human interaction I had felt that night. I placed the same order, secretly hoping he'd be the one to deliver it again. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. There he was, red raincoat and all, this time with a grin already tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Back again," he said, shaking off the rain. "Guess I'm addicted to Alfredo," I joked. "You've got good taste," he said, handing me the bag. "It's the best thing on the menu." This time I hesitated before closing the door. "You look like you could use something warm. Want a cup of tea?" He blinked in surprise, then smiled. "That would be nice. Thank you." I made him chamomile in a chipped ceramic mug and we chatted in the doorway. About the weather, about how busy he'd been, about the restaurant. His name was Jason Miller. He had just turned 18 and was working delivery shifts to save money for college. He lived with his mom and younger sister, carried a heavy sense of responsibility on his shoulders, and spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who'd grown up faster than he should have. Over the next few weeks, my pasta cravings conveniently increased. So did Jason's appearances at my door. Each time our conversations lasted a little longer. Sometimes he'd stay on the porch for a few minutes, sipping tea and catching his breath before continuing his route. Eventually, he started dropping by even when there wasn't a delivery. Sometimes with coffee, sometimes just to say hello. One particularly cold night, I noticed he looked more worn out than usual. "Everything okay?" I asked, handing him a hot drink. He gave a tired laugh. "My bike chain snapped halfway through the shift. I've been walking most of the way." "That's awful. Come in, at least warm up for a bit." He hesitated, clearly torn between politeness and exhaustion. But then he stepped inside. I handed him a towel and pointed him to the kitchen table. That night we talked for hours. He opened up about his life. How his dad left when he was 10, how his mom juggled 2 jobs to keep them afloat, how he helped out however he could. He dreamed of studying computer science and designing apps. His voice lit up when he spoke about coding and ideas he had. I was struck by his sincerity, his groundedness, his quiet strength. In return, I shared pieces of myself I hadn't in years. My dreams of becoming a novelist. How I settled into editing instead. How the silence of the house after the divorce sometimes felt like it might swallow me whole. For the first time in a long while I felt truly heard. Jason became a fixture in my life. Not in a grand, sweeping way, but in the small, quiet moments that matter. He'd help carry groceries or fix a leaky faucet. He never overstepped. He never made me feel uncomfortable. He was just present, steady, kind. I worried at first what people might think. A middle-aged woman spending time with a teenage boy. But nothing about it was inappropriate. He wasn't a delivery boy anymore. He was a friend. A bright, unexpected light in my quiet world. One Saturday, I was struggling to assemble a bookshelf. Jason had dropped by to return a novel I'd lent him, and I practically begged him for help. He laughed. "Let me guess you didn't read the instructions." We spent the afternoon piecing it together, laughing as we fumbled with screws and confusing diagrams. The living room filled with the smell of pizza and the sound of our laughter. That night we sat on the floor, eating and talking about everything. Movies, dreams, childhood memories. I hadn't laughed like that in years. Because of him I started writing again. Not for work. For myself. Little journal entries. Story ideas. Bits of life that I hadn't touched since before the divorce. It felt like a part of me had been unlocked, awakened by simple kindness. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sky melt into purples and golds, Jason turned to me and said softly, "You know, Emily, you've kind of become my safe space." I looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean? I don't really have anyone I can talk to like this. With you, I don't have to hold everything together. I can just be me." My eyes welled up. Smiled. "You've done more for me than you realize, too." We sat in silence after that. But it was the good kind. The kind where nothing more needs to be said. Eventually, Jason received a scholarship offer to a local college. He was over the moon. I was so proud I cried. We celebrated with takeout and chocolate cake, and he promised to keep stopping by. Even after classes began. He kept his promise. Not as often, but enough. Looking back now, I realize that Jason didn't just deliver food that night in the rain. He delivered something I didn't even know I was starving for. Connection, warmth, and a sense of purpose. He brought laughter into a quiet house and hope into a lonely heart. He didn't arrive with a grand gesture. He showed up with a paper bag of pasta and an open heart. And in doing so, he changed my life. Forever.